Well, we're still here in Guadalajara, Mexico, in the International Congress of Identity. And for me, it's a pleasure to share these views and words with Michael Jones. Michael Jones is a doctor in literature, and he has been introducing some ideas and some words related to the doctrine of the Holy Church. And in this matter, I would like you to respond if there is Judaism, that theology in what way is against Christianism, or it cannot live together.
Well, theologically, the antagonism between Jews and Christians goes all the way back to the time of the crucifixion. The Gospels tell us that the Jews were hiding in the upper room. That the apostles were hiding in the upper room out of fear of the Jews. So the fear, the antagonism has gone from the beginning all the way up to the present day, because the Jews, in rejecting Christ, rejected Logos, and in rejecting Logos, they became a permanent revolutionary group that is spreading a revolutionary ferment throughout the world to this day. So it was Bolshevism at one point, it's Zionism at another point, it's neoconservatism at another point, and now in the state of Indiana, we have just witnessed an attack in the name of homosexual marriage. This is the latest Jewish front in the culture wars. And I say this not because I'm anyone to listen to, but the Vice President of the United States said this in a speech he gave in May of 2013, praising the Jews for their role as cultural revolutionaries, and especially praising them for their role in promoting gay marriage. This is the state-of-the-art revolutionary movement to overturn the social order in the United States.
What do you mean that do they promote low values, no values, or something that might overthrow the Christianism all over the world, or there is like a plan or something like that?
Yes, it's become so ingrained in every Jew that he is a revolutionary. Oftentimes you don't need a plan. They just come together, and they just the main fact of Jewish life is that they're always a minority. They've always been a minority in whatever culture they've lived in, and when they're a minority, they feel they have to weaken the majority, and so they're constantly engaged in cultural subversion. So the vehicle always changes, but the principle is always the same. We want to subvert the majority, especially if the majority is Christian, because there is a hatred of Christianity it's the essence of what it means to be a Jew. They have no positive essence. It's a negative essence. It's rejection of Christ. It is hatred of Christ. And hatred is a word that it's not my word. Rabbi Meyer Soloveichik, in First Things, which is supposed to be a kind of ecumenical magazine, said that hatred was a Jewish virtue. So this is their teaching. They feel that they can hate their enemies, and they feel that Christians are their enemies. When they talk to each other, they may pretend that they're not in public, but that's only to gain a deeper hold to engage in more subversion.
In what ways do they active in order to vulnerate or withdraw or reduce the power of the Catholic Church or the Christianism? Besides, I mean, homosexuality, promoting, but I mean, what other ways? There is a financial way, there is a way of corporations. Are anything else that might help on it?
The main instrument of Jewish power throughout the ages was always usury. This was the Achilles heel of Christian Europe. Christians cannot tolerate usury. It's a sin. It remains a sin. Pope Benedict XIV in 1745 issued the encyclical Vix Pervenit, in which he says that taking any interest on a loan is usury, and that usury is always a sin. So that's never going to change. That's the moral law. It's immutable. It's never going to change. But what you saw over centuries of Christianity, especially in Italy at the time of the Renaissance, was heavy Christian involvement in usury, Christians acting like Jews. But how did that start? Well, they allowed the Jews in early on. As soon as there was a need for a money economy, there were Jews lending people money, Christians money at 44.33% was the standard annual rate. So because it never came to grips with usury, it never came to grips with Jewish power. And so there was a moment of opportunity in Florence in the 1490s when Savonarola became dictator of Florence. Savonarola moved against both sodomy and usury, which are the two signs you're at the end of your culture. When those two things appear, as they appeared in the United States, it's the end. And he made reforms, but the Pope collaborated in his death, and that was the end of the possibility of reform. And the next protest was Luther, and he broke with the church. And once he broke with the church, you had specific principalities that would promote usury. And that was the beginning of capitalism, and that's been that way ever since.
Do you believe that the Christianity is living a decadence today, or is something that is, broke, interfere to the essence of growing? Are we living a decadence in the Christian world today?
I think the word decadence was more appropriate for the period beginning in 1965. Right,
after the council.
The second council ended 50 years ago. We're now going through the 50th anniversary. The way to decadence was paid by confusion. In 65, no one knew what the church taught anymore. And there were interpretations, deliberately false interpretations, spread by CIA operations like Time magazine, for example. Time magazine was heavily involved with the CIA and heavily involved in trying to cripple the church by imposing an interpretation on the documents that was not warranted. So with this confusion, and then with the Jews at this point breaking the production code in Hollywood, the culture was sexualized. There was a flood of pornographic movies, pornography. It was the sexual revolution. It had a tremendously disorienting effect on the Catholic population. Many priests succumbed to the sexual temptation at this point. And I guess you could call that a period of decadence. We're now 50 years away from that. And so what we're having now is people staggering around as if a bomb had gone off in total disorientation, still not knowing what happened. And part of our job at Culture Wars is to explain what happened. We're going to bring a book out on the role that John Courtney Murray played in working with the CIA to co-opt or derail or deliberately misinterpret the Second Vatican Council. We're bringing a book out. We show the details there. And what we're hoping for is a re-examination of the relationship between church and state. Because the de facto interpretation of the Vatican Council was the separation of church and state was a good thing. That's not what the council document said, but that's the interpretation that's been imposed on the document, and it has had disastrous effects for the church and for the world for the past 50 years.
We have seen that, like you mentioned before, there was a twist on the teachings of the church, and lately we see more movements of ecumenism, no? And I was wondering if the ecumenism, like is going on, praying between all churches together, is a harass to the Catholic faith.
I think the days of ecumenism are over. I was in Rome speaking to officials in the Vatican, and I was proposing a discussion between Shias and Catholics about the events of 1979. And as soon as I said this, they say, well, we're not interested in interreligious dialogue anymore. And I said, no, it's not interreligious dialogue. I just want to talk with some Muslims about 1979. It's not interreligious dialogue. I don't want to talk about Islam. They don't want to talk about Catholicism. We just want to talk about 1979. So I think this gives you some indication that people have they've had enough because it went nowhere. The biggest amount of interreligious dialogue ended up being devoted to the Jews And the Jews exploited it for their own benefit, and they used it to basically get the church to abandon its principles. There are naive churchmen out there who are now willing to say that the Jews just had to follow their covenant. Well, that's ridiculous. That contradicts Catholic theology. But that was the purpose of Jewish dialogue. The Jews wanted the Catholics to deny their own faith. There were Catholics who were stupid enough to fall into that trap. And I think the people I was talking to know that, and they don't want it to happen again. And so there's no dialogue going on. None. It's over.
Your trip to Vatican, you spoke with different authorities there, and you told me behind camera there were three things they are not talking about.
Yeah. There are three areas in which the church is not preaching the gospel. The first area is the Jews. The church is not preaching the gospel. St. Paul said the Jews killed Christ, and they are enemies of the entire human race. Have you heard that from the pulpit lately? No. Okay. When St. Peter went to Rome, to Jerusalem, I'm sorry, the first thing he said to the Jews was, "You killed Christ." And the Jews were cut to the heart. And then the Jews said, "What must we do to be saved?" And he said, "You have to be baptized." That's the essence of the Christian faith. And no one's preaching it. Certainly not to the Jews. They're bragging that they don't have an apostolate to the Jews anymore. So that's a disaster. The second one is the relationship between church and state, which I've already talked to you about. No one knows the real story of John Courtney Murray's collaboration with Time Life and the CIA, okay? And the third area is usury. But there is movement there because Pope Francis comes from South America, an area that has been exploited by American economic imperialism. They know these problems firsthand. His father used to have seminars on Quadragesimo Anno, the encyclical of the 1930s on Catholic social teaching. So he's aware of that, and I expect there will be more statements attacking this unjust capitalist economic system from the Pope.
However, the Pope has a very good relationship with the Jews.
Absolutely.
2 or 3 years ago.
That's why they told me. That's why the guy told me, forget about it. Forget about talking about the Jews. He said, forget it.
It isn't a strategy, or is something like that?
I think it's just a naive misunderstanding of the meaning of Nostra Aetate. I mean, we're talking about a Jesuit, okay? I was taught by the Jesuits. They were swept away, okay? The CIA, and ended up collaborating with the CIA on the anti-communist crusade, and then another bunch of Jesuits got swept away by Marxism. The Jesuits are in a state of crisis, and they're symbolic of the church, which doesn't know what it believes anymore, and because it doesn't know what it believes, it gets swept away by ideologies, ideological fads. So I think the whole experiment, okay, Nostra Aetate is the teaching of the Catholic Church. It says that not all Jews at the time of the crucifixion called for Christ's death. Well, that's true. Who can argue with that? Whoever said anything different? You know, we know that the Blessed Mother did not yell, "Crucify him." She was a Jew. She didn't yell, "Crucify him," and so on and so forth. I think this, if you want my honest opinion, I think that the Council Fathers were reacting to the Jewish pressure that was put on them, and this was a kind of private joke among them.
We see at the same time that the teachings tell us that there will be a miracle in the future, which will be the conversion of the Jews. Do you think that this could happen in a short, middle, or long term?
There are some stories about a miraculous conversion of the Jews at the end of time. This is not church teaching. This is some opinion or other, okay? My point, and we may not be in the end times. We may be in the end times, we may not be in the end times. But I am determined, my goal in life is the conversion of the Jews. I wrote my book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, to bring about the conversion of the Jews, because I think this is the only way we can solve the problems in the world today. We've got the Jews at the source of so many problems. Why? Because no one is holding them accountable for what they're doing. Everyone thinks of them as a victim that can never do anything wrong, and no one is offering them a better alternative, namely Christianity. It's better than Judaism. Judaism is an obsolete religion of hatred. The Jews hate it. Go, if you take my, go look at the Coen brothers, one of the top directors in Hollywood at this time, did a movie called A Simple Man. This shows you this loathing that Jews have toward this religion, how corrupt this religion is. You know, an honest movie by Jews about that religion. So there are Jews who have converted because of reading my book, and they tell me how thankful they are to be freed from this bondage. So why is the church not offering these people this gift? This, it seems to me, is the real anti-Semitism. When you are not willing to offer the Jew the gift of salvation. That's the real... What could be worse than condemning someone to hell for all eternity? And if you die without baptism, in rejection of Jesus Christ, where else are you going to go? You can't be saved under those conditions. So I think this is a terrible situation for the Jews. It's a terrible situation for the Catholic Church, and it's got to change. The church cannot perdure in error. If it could, she wouldn't be the church. So the change is going to have to take place. If I can bring it about, that would be great.
The usings of promoting all these breaking values and everything that hurts the Christianity and Catholics in particular, are they TV or mass media networks and the Hollywood? I guess they are like the industry to break down all related to values, family, etc.
Yes, in Iran, the lectures I gave in Iran were about Hollywood and in the 1930s and the battle between Catholics and Jews over the content of Hollywood films. And that's what happened in the 30s was basically imposed. The Catholics beat the Jews in cultural battle, and they imposed their a code that prohibited nudity in films, ridiculing religion, and promotion of homosexuality. When the Jews broke that code, there was no one to stop them. And so not only has that spread throughout the United States, it's spread throughout the world. And now Hollywood is the main vehicle for cultural subversion throughout the world. It is, in effect, the propaganda ministry of the United States, except oftentimes it acts against the interest. It acts against the interest not only of the United States, but even of the sitting government. For example, the Obama administration is trying to conduct a deal with Iran, and Hollywood is determined, like the other Jews, to make sure that doesn't happen.
When you were a teacher at the university, you've been teaching at different Catholic schools or universities, that's right?
I got a job at St. Mary's College in 1979. I was fired 1 year later for my stand against abortion. This was a classic example of cultural subversion. This was called itself a Catholic institution, but it had been taken over by the feminists, and it was used now to promote feminist values, not Catholic values. And obviously, the feminist value number one at that time was abortion, and so it was like I had committed the unpardonable sin, and so I was fired.
Do you believe is a political movement, or is a beliefs movement of independence of their own? Like the woman claims that she had the decision of use their own bodies and etc. Is that a political movement? Had to do with the religion, or involves both?
No, it was a political movement led by Jews. The Rockefellers were involved too. The purpose of it was to drive down wages by doubling the workforce. This cause was supported by the most powerful people in the United States. The government supported it, and these Catholic schools just decided, well, if we want money, if we want to be taken seriously, we have to go along with this agenda. So they capitulated completely.
To move forward and overwhelm all this, what do you think we should do as Catholics and Christians?
The Catholic Church has to regain its connection with traditional teaching on the three areas that I mentioned: the Jews, church and state, and usury. It has to abandon the failed experiments of Vatican II. We can either have unity in the church, or we can have dialogue with the Jews, but we can't have both. As soon as you have dialogue with the Jews, there's no unity in the church. Dialogue with the Jews is a failed experiment. We have to use the anniversary, 50th anniversary of the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council to take stock and say, okay, we're not challenging the documents of Vatican II. They are an expression of the magisterium of the Catholic Church. You can't bring 2,000 bishops and the Holy Spirit together and get error. We're not talking about errors here, but we're talking about the interpretation, and we're talking about failed experiments like Catholic-Jewish dialogue based on a faulty interpretation. We have to take stock and say, this has failed. This is a mistake. This is hurting the Catholic Church. We need to stop this. We need to get back to the roots, and we need to start supporting the Catholic people. Someone mentioned that Pope Francis gave 100,000 euros to Auschwitz, and mentioned that there are Catholic martyrs who have organizations. Why don't you give it to the Catholic martyrs? This is obviously in the direction of supporting Catholic ethnic solidarity throughout the world. That would be a big step in the right direction.
Mr. Michael Jones, thank you very much for sharing this interview with the TLV1 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you. De nada.
Gracias. Y ahora volvemos a los estudios.